Her name is Maddie. She goes, it's Natalie.
What's her last name?
Clifton.
How old is she?
She's 8 years old.
Where was she playing at around the house?
Right around the house here. She had on a pair of shorts and a red t-shirt.
When's the last time anybody saw her?
4:30 to 5 o'clock. About 5:30 was the last time we saw her. And I was letting the kids play out here for a little while. And then she disappeared. Sold.
A neighbor calls police to her home across the street from Maddie's home. She's made a gruesome discovery in her 14-year-old's bedroom. A body is stuffed in his waterbed.
We found Maddie Clifton this morning at about 7:30 a.m. She was dead.
Jacksonville, Florida, 1998. A little girl steps out her front door on a Tuesday afternoon to play. And by dinner time, she has vanished without a trace. For 7 days, an entire neighborhood is turned completely upside down. The FBI rolls in. The National Guard is deployed. A $100,000 reward goes on the table. Hundreds of flashlights sweep through the dark every single night, and one name echoes off every house, every yard, every shadow on every street. Maddie, Maddie, Maddie. But here's the detail from this true crime case that will stop you cold. The one thing that makes the story unlike almost anything else in American true crime history. She was never far away, not even close. Every search party, every prayer circle, every tearful press conference, every night her mother lay awake unable to close her eyes. Maddie was right there the whole time, closer than anyone could have imagined. And the one person in that neighborhood who knew exactly where she was kept showing up on that street, calling her name, handing out flyers, looking her family straight in the face. This documentary is going to take you deep into one of the most chilling and heartbreaking true crime cases the state of Florida has ever produced. And I want to tell you right now, if you think you already know where this is going, stay with me, because there are layers to this story that most people never hear. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from tonight, and whether you are in Jacksonville, somewhere else in Florida, or tuning in from anywhere across the United States, I want to know. And if true crime documentaries like this one are your thing, go ahead and hit subscribe right now so you never miss another one. Now, let us go back to the beginning. The Lakewood neighborhood sits on the south side of Jacksonville, Florida, and it is the kind of place where everybody knows everybody. Where kids run freely in and out of each other's yards all day long, where parents wave from porches, and where the sound of children playing outside is just part of the background noise of daily life. A tight-knit working-class community where the streets feel safe and neighbors look out for one another. At least that is what everyone believed. And right in the middle of all of it was a little girl named Maddie Clifford. Though everyone who knew her, and it seemed like everyone did, called her Maddie. Maddie was 8 years old. She lived on the block with her dad Steve, her mom Sheila, and her older sister Jessie. And if you had to describe Maddie Clifford in one word, most people who knew her would probably land on the same one. Alive. Not just in the literal sense, but in every sense of the word. She had this energy about her that filled up whatever space she walked into. You could not keep that kid indoors. The moment there was daylight and an open door, she was gone. Out on the street, knocking on doors, rounding up other kids, finding something to do. She loved sports with everything she had. Basketball was her favorite, but she would play just about anything. Football, golf, baseball. If there was a game happening anywhere on that block, Maddie was either already in it or she was on her way. And then in the next breath, she would clean herself up and perform as a ballerina in a school recital, poised and graceful like she had never seen a blade of grass in her life. She also played the piano, and by all accounts she had genuine talent for it. But the thing her family always came back to when they talked about her, the thing that really defined who Maddie Clifford was, had nothing to do with sports or music or any of that. It was her kindness, the way she noticed people. If she spotted someone standing off to the side looking uncomfortable, looking left out, looking like they did not quite belong, Maddie would walk straight over, introduce herself, and find a way to pull them in. She could not stand the idea of anyone feeling alone. At 8 years old, she had more emotional awareness than most adults ever develop. That was just who she was. And that quality, that instinct to reach out, to show up for people, to make sure nobody felt invisible, is something that matters a great deal to this true crime story. Because it is a big part of the reason she knocked on a certain door that November afternoon. It is Tuesday, November the 3rd, 1998. The temperature in Jacksonville is mild, the sky is open, and it is the kind of late afternoon that makes you want to be outside. At around 5 o'clock, Maddie is out on the street doing what she always does. That day, her activity of choice is golf. She is hitting balls up and down the road, completely in her element. The neighborhood is its usual self. Familiar faces, familiar sounds, nothing out of the ordinary. At 6:30 in the evening, Sheila calls both girls in for dinner. Jessie comes through the front door alone. She tells her mom she has not been with Maddie and has no idea where she is. Sheila steps outside and starts asking around. Nobody on the street has seen her. None of the kids she usually plays with. None of the parents. Nobody. Within a very short window of time, Sheila picks up the phone and calls 911.
Her name is Maddie. She goes, it's Madeline.
What's her last name?
Clifton.
How old is she?
She's 8 years old.
Where was she playing at around the
Right around the house here. She had on a pair of shorts and a red T-shirt.
When's the last time anybody saw her?
4:30 to 5 o'clock. About 5:30 was the last time we saw her. And I was letting the kids play out here for a little while, and then she disappeared.
By that night, the entire neighborhood is outside, flashlights moving in every direction, Maddie's name being called out into the dark over and over again by dozens of voices. As the temperature drops and the hours pass, more people come out rather than fewer. Neighbors later said that Maddie felt like everybody's daughter, everybody's little sister. With so many young children living on that same block, all of them playing together every single day, this hit every single family personally. But the night passes and the sun comes up, and there is still nothing. No item of clothing, no sign of a struggle, no clue of any kind pointing anywhere at all. By the 24-hour mark, the search for Maddie Clifford is taken on a scale that nobody in Lakewood has ever witnessed. Neighbors described it as almost circus-like. If you were not at work or at school, you were out looking. Cars coming in and out of the neighborhood were being stopped and checked. The National Guard was called in to go through the sewer system, open manhole covers, search dumpsters, and comb through miles and miles of woodland and ponds surrounding the area. The FBI came on board. A $100,000 reward was publicly announced, and house after house was being turned inside out by investigators desperate for any kind of lead. The story was spreading fast. Media coverage was growing across the state of Florida, and the name Maddie Clifford was becoming one that people far outside of Jacksonville were now recognizing. Every true crime case has a moment where it crosses from a local tragedy into something the whole country starts paying attention to. And this one was moving in that direction quickly. Back in the neighborhood, detectives were quietly zeroing in on one particular person, a man named Larry who lived 5 doors down from the Clifford family. He had come up early in the investigation because he appeared to be one of the last people to see Maddie before she disappeared. Larry told police he had been out in his yard that afternoon chipping golf balls, the same activity Maddie had been doing just a short distance away. He said he watched her walking off to retrieve more golf balls at some point, and after that, he never saw her again. That detail put him squarely in the spotlight. When investigators looked into his background, they found 2 prior arrests from nearly 20 years earlier for serious offenses. In both cases, the charges were ultimately dropped, but that history, combined with his proximity to Maddie and his account of that afternoon, made him a person of significant interest. Police came back to Larry again and again. He was interviewed approximately 10 times, one of those sessions lasting a full 8 hours. He also took a lie detector test, and by his own admission, he did not pass it. But Larry was cooperative throughout. He said he would give investigators whatever they needed and open everything up. He understood exactly how it looked, and he addressed it directly. He said in close to his own words, "I am a prime suspect. I am 45 years old. I play with children, and I have a criminal record. That makes me a suspect." But after 4 days of intense focus on the neighborhood, investigators made a decision that surprised a lot of people. They pulled back from the area-wide search and shifted resources toward leads, pointing outside of Lakewood entirely. Homicide Detective Lieutenant Mark Foxworth explained that they did not have evidence pointing to an abduction. He acknowledged that foul play was becoming more likely as each day passed, but said they could not rule out the possibility that Maddie had walked away on her own. For the people on that street, that was hard to accept. Maddie was not the kind of child who wandered off, but without physical evidence pointing in a clear direction, investigators had to follow what they had. Day 5, Day 6. The reward sat unclaimed, the leads went cold. Maddie's family held on, the neighborhood held on, and the whole city of Jacksonville held its breath. It was now a full week since anyone had seen Maddie Clifford walk out of her front door. And then, on November the 10th, 1998, everything changed. Not because of a tip, not because of a break in the investigation, not because of anything law enforcement did. It changed because a mother decided to clean her teenage son's bedroom. Missy Phillips had a lot on her mind that day. Like every other parent in the Lakewood neighborhood, the disappearance of Maddie Clifford had been weighing on her all week. She and her family had been out searching. They had handed out flyers. They had walked those streets at night, calling Maddie's name just like everyone else. At some point that day, she walked past her 14-year-old son Joshua's bedroom and pushed the door open. The room was a mess. She decided right then she was going to clean it up. She grabbed a bag and started picking things up off the floor. On one of the bedside tables, she noticed a missing persons flyer with Maddie Clifford's face on it. Joshua had one, just like so many other people in the neighborhood did. As she continued tidying, she noticed a wet spot near the bed. Joshua had a waterbed, and Missy had been picking up on an odd smell in that part of the house for a couple of days. She had figured the waterbed was leaking and the dampness was causing it. She pulled the mattress up and could see immediately that the frame underneath was in bad shape, collapsing. She started lifting things off to assess the damage and fix it. As she worked around the frame, she noticed something caught up in it. A small sock tangled in the structure. She reached down to pull it free, but it would not come loose. So she got down on her hands and knees and looked underneath. A small foot was looking back at her. Missy later described that moment by saying her eyes knew exactly what they were seeing, but her brain was refusing to connect it. It was the kind of shock that does not arrive all at once. It comes in pieces, and each piece is worse than the last. She ran. Straight out of that bedroom, down the stairs, out the front door, and across the street to the first police officer she could find. She grabbed him and pulled him back inside and up to that room. Within minutes, the house was filled with law enforcement. Tape was going up everywhere. Underneath the waterbed frame in Joshua Phillips's bedroom, investigators found the body of 8-year-old Maddie Clifford. She had been there for 6 days. And when they carefully removed her, one of her small hands was found still clutching the frame. Let that land for a moment. Police had been inside that house more than once during the search. They had walked through it. They had noticed the smell coming from Joshua's room. But the explanation that was accepted at the time was that Joshua kept several pet birds, and the smell was attributed to them. Nobody had lifted that mattress. Nobody had looked underneath it.
A neighbor calls police to her home across the street from Maddie's home. She's made a gruesome discovery in her 14-year-old's bedroom. A body is stuffed in his waterbed.
So for 6 days, while an entire city searched and prayed and hoped, Maddie had been there. Across the street from her own front door, in the bedroom of a boy she had considered a friend. As word spread through the neighborhood that a body had been found, people began gathering outside. An impromptu prayer circle formed right there on the street. A televised press conference was held shortly after, and the announcement was made. The search for Maddie Clifford was over. Residents who were there that day said the air felt thick, heavy, like the grief was something you could physically feel pressing down on you. Veteran prosecutor Bernie de la Rionda later described it as one of the most devastating murders in Jacksonville's history. He said there was not a single person in that city who did not know about Maddie, who was not praying for her, or who had not in some way tried to help find her, and now they had their answer. And it was the worst possible one. Boxes of flowers and food arrived at the Clifford home. Yellow flowers, purple balloons, an outpouring from a community that was absolutely shattered.
We found Maddie Clifton this morning at about 7:30 a.m. She was dead.
Sheriff Nat Glover struggled visibly to hold himself together as he addressed the public. But the work that now had to be done required a different kind of focus, because this was no longer a missing persons case. This was a murder investigation, and the suspect was already in custody. The autopsy results told a story that was difficult to process even for the most experienced investigators on the case. Maddie had been struck multiple times with a baseball bat and had sustained multiple stab wounds to her throat and across her body. The baseball bat and the pocket knife were both still in the room when investigators arrived. Her shorts and underwear had been removed and found near her body, but the medical examination found no evidence of a physical assault of a sexual nature. That detail would become significant later when the question of motive came up in court. Crime scene investigator David Chase, with 16 years of experience at the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office, processed that bedroom. He said afterward it was one of the worst scenes he had ever worked in his entire career. Joshua Earl Phillips was 14 years old. He lived directly across the street from the Clifford family and had known Maddie for the approximately 2 years his family had lived in the neighborhood. There was video footage on his own camera of Maddie and her sister Jessie playing in his front yard with his puppy.
Hey! Hi. So she's across the street. And then she's also from across the street.
3 kids just being silly together, laughing and goofing around. By every account from every neighbor, every teacher, every person who knew him, Joshua was a quiet kid who kept mostly to himself, did well in school, loved his pet birds, liked reading and spending time on his computer, and had never once been in any kind of trouble. When Missy made that discovery, Joshua was picked up at school. Because of his age, law enforcement did not release his name to the public right away. His parents, Steve and Missy Phillips, met him at the police station. Steve told his son simply, "Tell the truth, and start telling it now." And so, with his father beside him, Joshua told investigators what he said had happened on the afternoon of November the 3rd. He said Maddie had knocked on his door wanting to play, which was completely normal. She did it regularly. He told her he had chores to do, but she was persistent. He finally agreed to come outside, but only for a few minutes, because his father was due home soon, and he was not supposed to have other children over when his dad was not there. Joshua said he was genuinely afraid of his father, that Steve Phillips drank heavily, used drugs, and was physically violent toward both him and his mother. The rules in that house were strict, and the consequences for breaking them were serious. His dad had a particular issue with girls coming over, something Missy herself later confirmed. Joshua said the two of them went into the backyard near the pool at around 5:15 and started playing baseball. At some point, he said he hit the ball back and it struck Maddie in the face near her eye, causing her to bleed and cry out. She fell and was screaming, and he panicked, terrified of his father finding out a girl had been hurt at the house while he was not home. He dragged her inside. He said the force of it caused some of her clothing to come off. Once inside, he said he struck her in the head with a baseball bat, rendering her unconscious. He then pushed her under his bed, went downstairs, and acted like nothing had happened. When his father came home, the two talked briefly before Joshua went back upstairs. That is when he heard something that changed everything. He heard Maddie groaning beneath the bed. She was still alive. He pulled the mattress back and removed her from underneath the frame, and then he used a pocket knife to inflict the wounds that ultimately ended her life. He pushed her back under the bed, replaced the mattress, closed his bedroom door, and went about his life for the next 6 days, while the entire city of Jacksonville searched for her. He went to school. He came home. He participated in the search. He spoke to police officers inside that house without flinching. One patrol sergeant recalled visiting the Phillips home the day before Maddie was found. He said Joshua was sitting on his bed, petting his dog, and described him as completely calm, unemotional, unaffected. The sergeant said thinking about it now is genuinely chilling, because Maddie was right there beneath where Joshua was sitting. And at night, when the search parties went quiet and the flashlights went dark, Joshua Phillips went to sleep, literally on top of her. Because of the intense media coverage the case had generated across the state of Florida, Judge Charles Arnold moved the trial out of Jacksonville to ensure Joshua could receive a fair hearing. The state attorney's office, led by District Attorney Harry Shorstein, made clear from the outset that every available resource would be devoted to this case. He said publicly that the murder of Maddie Clifford had shaken him personally, just as it had shaken the rest of the community. The decision was also made to try Joshua Phillips as an adult. He was 14 years old at the time of the crime. That decision was controversial the moment it was announced, and it would remain controversial for years to come. A year after Maddie Clifford was laid to rest, Joshua Phillips was standing in a courtroom. The defense built their case around the environment Joshua had grown up in. They painted a picture of a boy living under the weight of fear and abuse, a child so conditioned to hide anything that might bring his father's anger down on him that when something went wrong that afternoon, his response was not rational. It could not have been rational, they argued, because nothing about the way he had been raised equipped him to handle crisis. His lawyer told the jury that what began as an accident had deteriorated through a kind of panic that bordered on madness. He said Joshua Phillips was not a monster. He was a deeply frightened child who made a catastrophic series of decisions in a moment of terror. Notably, the defense did not call a single witness to the stand, and Joshua himself never spoke in that courtroom about what he said had happened that day. His attorney saved everything for the closing argument. The prosecution pushed back hard on every part of that narrative. They said Joshua's account simply did not hold up against the physical evidence. He claimed the two had been playing baseball in the backyard when the ball struck Maddie near the eye, but the autopsy results did not support that. The injuries were not consistent with being hit by a baseball in the way he described. He said he dragged her inside forcefully enough that her clothing came off. But investigators found no blood and no physical evidence leading from the backyard into the house, No dirt on her body, no trail, nothing outside that room to suggest any of what he described had actually taken place there. The prosecution also noted that prior to the events of that afternoon, Joshua had been viewing adult content on his computer. They included it because in their view, when added to everything else, it pointed towards something premeditated rather than accidental. They argued Maddie had not been injured before she entered that room. They argued she had been brought inside deliberately, and they argued that what followed was not panic. It was intent. David Chase took the stand and provided testimony that supported the prosecution's position at multiple points. The detail that he shared, that the physical evidence suggested Maddie had still been alive when Joshua came back upstairs after speaking with his father, was one of the most difficult moments of the entire trial. She had survived the first assault. She had been conscious enough to make sound, and rather than get help, Joshua Phillips made the decision to make sure she could not. After a difficult and emotionally exhausting trial, the jury returned their verdict.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree, as charged in the indictment.
Joshua Earl Patrick Phillips, it is the sentence of this court that you be confined in prison without the benefit of parole for the rest of your natural life.
Guilty of murder in the first degree. Joshua Earl Phillips was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He was 15 years old when formally sentenced and assigned inmate number J11775.
We've always taken the position that the correct approach to juvenile crime and to crime prevention is to deal aggressively with the very serious juvenile offenders.
On November the 14th, 1998, Maddie Clifford was laid to rest. The streets of Lakewood were lined with people standing shoulder to shoulder, holding hands, holding flowers. Yellow blooms trailed behind the procession. Purple balloons lifted into the Florida sky. A sea of people who had spent a week searching for her now stood together to say goodbye. When a case like this one closes in a courtroom, there's a tendency to think the chapter is finished, that the verdict draws a line and life moves forward in some orderly way. But true crime cases of this magnitude do not close cleanly. They leave behind a landscape of broken pieces that people spend years, sometimes entire lifetimes, trying to figure out how to live around. Joshua appealed his conviction in 2002. The appeal was reviewed and rejected. His conviction stood. In interviews conducted from behind bars over the years, he reflected on what he had done and what it had cost. Not just Maddie and her family, but everyone connected to that afternoon in November of 1998. He said he would catch himself thinking about the things he had missed. Milestones, experiences, the ordinary texture of a life lived freely. And then he would stop himself. Because in those moments he would think about what Maddie had missed. Not a milestone here or there. Everything. Every single thing. He also described the mental walls he had built as a 14-year-old to survive those 6 days. The automatic instinct to push it all down, close the door, and pretend. He said in his own words, "I never made the decision to ignore it. I just did. That was my defense mechanism for everything when I was a kid." In 2012, the United States Supreme Court issued a landmark ruling determining that mandatory life sentences without the possibility of parole for juvenile offenders were unconstitutional. That decision immediately threw a significant number of existing sentences into question, including Joshua's. In 2017, nearly 2 decades after Maddie was laid to rest, Joshua was back in a courtroom for a resentencing hearing. All of the evidence from that November afternoon was laid out again in front of a judge. David Chase, now retired, took the stand once more and walked through what he had found in that bedroom all those years ago. Joshua sat at the defense table, and by accounts from people in that courtroom, he looked down and covered his eyes as Chase described the condition in which Maddie's body had been discovered. Joshua was given the opportunity to speak directly to Maddie's family.
I've wanted to say this for a very long time, and I'm grateful that this chance to do so in person has arrived. I don't pretend to know or understand your pain or to grasp the void that I have created in your lives. I can say this: I do understand pain. I have become quite intimate with suffering. Growing up in prison, I have seen many dark things, and I've been to some dark places. Many times throughout this journey, I came dreadfully close to ending my life just to escape it all. Guilt, despair, pain, hopelessness, fear, and shame. Each time, I was somehow able to continue on, mostly because I couldn't stand to put my mother through any more trauma. She's been through enough. I did something horrible. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for what happened. Even now, after all these years, it is just unfathomable that all this could have occurred. It tears my mind asunder to know that I stole such a precious life from you, from the world. I pray every day that you're able to live your lives in spite of the injury I've caused you. I'm supremely grateful to have an opportunity at physical freedom. Yet any joy that arises in my heart is immediately tempered by the knowledge that these proceedings bring all involved once again, face to face with the horror that occurred in 1998. When I walked the rec yard here in chains, I looked at the sky through mesh wiring, and I thank God repeatedly for giving me hope. My next breath is always devoted to wishing peace and healing upon you all. My hopes, fears, and wishes probably mean nothing to you, but they are there all the same. May you know peace. May you be free from suffering. May God bless you and heal your wounds as much as possible. Thank you, Your Honor.
He stood and addressed them for approximately 5 minutes. Maddie's family also addressed the court.
During these past few days, I've sat here in this courtroom and I have listened to all of the classes that the defendant has been able to take. What classes has Maddie been able to take over the past 18 years?
I didn't walk her down the aisle at her wedding, and we were not given the gift of her grandchildren, all taken by one evil, senseless act, and we don't know why.
We were raising our girls in a Christian home where we prayed every day. What we didn't know was that the devil himself had moved in right across the street. The same devil that picked up his flashlight and proceeded to look for her, knowing good and well where she was the whole time.
Now, has he really changed? I hope he has. That's a good thing if he has. I will concede that he's been a model prisoner. The question is, does that guarantee that he will be a model citizen out in society when he has access to pornography? And number two, he has access to young girls. The most troubling thing about this case to me is that we still have that why question out there.
He has all these certificates and he's a monk now and has found peace with his life, and that's great, but I still don't get to talk to Maddie. I still don't get to watch her graduate from high school, watch her graduate from college, watch her get married. I don't get to do any of that, and I just don't think that it's fair. I don't think it's fair that he does. Forgiveness is not in my hands. I am a Christian, I believe in God, and I feel like at the end of the day, that's not my job.
As they wait for a final decision from the judge, Jessie is enjoying her new home.
This is Maddie's room right here.
Her childhood home.
Kept our doors open and would yell at each other through here in the middle of the night and tell each other stories, and she'd end up in my bedroom and, Sissy, can I come sleep with you?
Where she says she plans to stay forever.
This was the best years of my life. And so being here, it just feels like I'm home.
They showed up as they always do, because every time Joshua Phillips appears in a courtroom, the Clifford families are right there with him, not because it is easy, but because Maddie deserves to have someone in that room who is there for her. At the conclusion of the 2017 hearing, Joshua received a revised sentence. Life in prison with the possibility of review after serving 25 years.
Hi, Mr. Phillips. It's a sad day for me. I have had to go through this process, and I'm just trying to do my duty the best I could. And I do wish you well. I think there is an opportunity, even with life in prison, to have a meaningful life. Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll stand adjourned. Thank you.
In 2020, he appealed again. The Florida Supreme Court rejected it. And then in mid-2025, now 41 years old, Joshua Phillips returned to court once more, this time requesting a formal review on the grounds that he had completed the mandatory 25-year term outlined in his revised sentencing.
Mandatory term.
Right now it's 6. This is a look at the new mugshot for convicted killer Joshua Phillips. Phillips is now expected to ask a judge to review his life sentence.
I am so sorry that the victim's family is having to go through this again.
That's the voice of veteran prosecutor Bernie De La Rionda. He is preparing to handle the review hearing for this case if and when it happens.
Joshua Phillips was brought back to the Duval County Jail from Sewanee County Correctional last week.
In court documents dated last month, Phillips formally applied for a sentence review, giving a timeline of events. In the filings, Phillips writes, as of this date, defendant has completed his 25-year mandatory term and now respectfully applies for an individualized sentencing review.
As of the time this true crime documentary was produced, that matter is still working its way through the court system. There is no resolution yet. And so the Clifford family continues to wait again for a process that keeps pulling them back to the worst moments of their lives. District Attorney Harry Shorstein, who had prosecuted the case and pushed hard for the conviction, later made a statement that surprised many people. He said he had no regrets about charging Joshua as an adult or pursuing the first-degree murder charge. Those were the right decisions given the nature of the crime, but he said he did carry one specific regret. He wished he had offered a second-degree murder plea, which would have given the judge more discretion in sentencing rather than locking in a mandatory life term. He described the outcome as severe and said that if there was ever a case to be made for a reconsideration of the sentence, he would be willing to support that conversation. That statement from the man who prosecuted the case is one of the more striking footnotes in this entire story, and it speaks to the broader tension that has always lived at the center of it, the question of what justice actually looks like when the person responsible was 14 years old. A lot of true crime coverage stops at the verdict, but the most honest version of the story does not stop there, because the people who lived through it did not get to stop there. And if we are going to tell this story the right way, we owe it to all of them to keep going. Jessie Clifford, Maddie's older sister, was a self-described nerdy kid growing up. She was not chasing popularity. She knew who she was, and was comfortable in that. And then November the 3rd happened. Overnight, everything about her identity shifted in a way she had absolutely no control over. Suddenly, she was no longer Jessie Clifford. She was Maddie Clifford's sister. And she found herself caught in one of the most painful and disorienting places a person can end up. Desperate not to forget who her sister was, equally desperate to grieve her and release some of that weight, and at the same time trying to figure out who she was as her own person. She described the small domestic details as some of the hardest things to navigate. For 3 years after Maddie died, Jessie said she kept automatically reaching for 4 of everything when she set the table. 4 plates, 4 forks, 4 knives. Her hand would go there on its own out of pure muscle memory, and then she would catch herself. That moment of almost forgetting and then remembering all over again. Every single time for 3 years before it finally stopped. And then it got harder in a different way. Because Sheila, unable to live in that house any longer, eventually moved out. And Jessie, who had spent years adjusting to a table set for 3, now had to adjust to setting it for 2. Just her and her dad. Another recalibration. Another daily reminder folded into the smallest moments of life. Steve and Sheila Clifford, who had known each other since high school and built a life together over 25 years, ultimately divorced. Jessie described it simply and without judgment. She said they grieved differently, in ways that over time pulled them in directions that could not be reconciled. Grief does that to people. It does not affect any two people the same way, and when those differences are deep enough and sustained long enough, even the strongest foundations can give way. A memorial playground was built at Maddie's school in her honor. A place for children to run and play and be together. Everything that Maddie had lived for. Her name attached to laughter and movement and the sound of kids who do not want to come inside, that it's hard to imagine anything more fitting. And then there is Missy Phillips, Joshua's mother, the woman who found Maddie under her son's bed, the woman who ran across that street and got help, and then the woman who had to keep living. As the mother of the boy who did it, in the neighborhood where it happened, surrounded by the community still mourning the child her son had taken. 2 years after Joshua was sentenced, her husband Steve Phillips was killed in a car accident, so she was now also a widow, carrying grief upon grief upon grief. She said she wanted to disappear. She split her time between Jacksonville and North Central Florida, quietly hoping she could find some version of a fresh start somewhere that did not know her name. But then something happened that is genuinely difficult to explain in purely logical terms. Jessie Clifford started showing up at Missy's door, the same Jessie who had lost her little sister. She started coming by to walk Missy's dog. She would watch from down the street from Missy's car to pull into the driveway with groceries, and she would run out to help carry them in. She showed up the way her little sister Maddie had always shown up for people, without being asked, without needing a reason, just because someone looked like they could use a friend, and Jessie was not the kind of person who could walk past that. Jessie said she saw Missy as a woman who did not deserve to carry her pain alone. She said, "She found Maddie. I cannot even imagine what that was like." And then to understand what her son had done. That is an enormous amount for one person to hold. The two of them, Jessie Clifford and Missy Phillips, developed a real and genuine connection over time. At various court hearings through the years, Sheila Clifford and Missy Phillips were seen sitting together in that courtroom. Two mothers on opposite sides of an unimaginable situation, finding some thread of shared humanity to hold on to. Missy said she believed they understood each other in a way most people could not. She said, "I cannot change what was. I can only move forward and help my son because he is still here and he is worth saving." And Sheila said simply, "She is a mother. She is a mom." And that was enough. That detail. Two women choosing to see each other as human beings in the middle of circumstances that could have very easily have made them enemies is one of the most profound things about this entire story. And it did not come from nowhere. It came directly from the example set by an 8-year-old girl who could not stand to see anyone feel alone. There are true crime cases you follow because of the mystery, because the puzzle pulls you in and you want to see how it resolves. And then there are cases that stay with you for a completely different reason. Not because of the puzzle, but because of the people. Because of what the story reveals about human beings, about fear and loss and grief and resilience, and the unexpected places where grace shows up when everything else has fallen apart. The Maddie Clifford case is the second kind. When you strip everything back, the investigation, the trial, the appeals, the legal arguments about juvenile sentencing and constitutional rights, what you are left with is this. An 8-year-old girl walked out of her front door on a Tuesday afternoon in Jacksonville, Florida, because she wanted to play. She knocked on a neighbor's door because she did not want him to feel lonely. And she never came home. That is the core of it. And is almost unbearably simple. Maddie Clifford was not a headline. She was not a case number. She was a kid who loved basketball and ballet and the piano and golf and football and pretty much any activity that involved other people and fresh air and the feeling of being fully alive in the world. She was the girl who noticed when someone was standing off to the side and went over to bring them in. She was the girl who made everyone feel like they mattered. At 8 years old, she was already the kind of person that most of us spend our whole lives trying to become. And she was gone in an afternoon. Joshua Phillips has now spent more than half of his life inside the Florida prison system. He went in as a 15-year-old boy, and he is now a man in his 40s. The legal questions surrounding his sentence are still not fully resolved. Courts will continue to weigh in, and every single time that happens, the Clifford family will show up, because Maddie deserves to have someone in that room who is there for her. Maddie's name has continued to travel far beyond Jacksonville. This true crime documentary is one small part of that, because cases like this one deserve to be told carefully and completely, not for shock value, not for clicks, but because the people at the center of them were real. Their lives mattered. And the ripple effects of a single afternoon in November 1998 are still moving outward today. If this documentary made you think about the nature of justice, about what we owe to victims and to their families, about what accountability looks like when the person responsible was a child, about the unexpected ways that human beings find each other in the wreckage of tragedy, then it did exactly what it was supposed to do. Maddie Clifford deserved a long life. She deserved to grow up and play basketball and perform on stage and sit down at a piano and knock on every door on every street she ever lived on. She deserved to become whoever she was going to become, and we will never know who that was. But we know who she already was at 8 years old, and that, even now, even after all of this, is something worth holding on to. Rest easy, Maddie. If this story moved you the way it moved me, leave a comment below and let me know what part of this case stayed with you. Tell me where you are watching from. Share this documentary with someone who appreciates true crime storytelling that goes beyond the surface and tries to honor the people behind the headlines. And if you have not already, hit subscribe. Because there are more stories like this one coming, and every single one of them deserves to be told the right way. Until next time.